Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are in the Calamus section, and we turn now to a little poem, We Two Boys Together Clinging. Another child poem, as it sometimes is pointed out. That is to say, you'll remember in Song of Myself, passage 6, that a child is the one that it will initiate the conversation. But I'm actually going to take us to Song of Myself, passage 11, and those swimmers who are having their good time, and you, of course, have the onlooker, the voyeur, watching. The thing I'm going to point out about that one is, in a relationship to this poem, is the use of all of these ing words, what we will call participles. It's fascinating to kind of watch this unfold. Now, my assumptions are that you've been with us at learnstrong.net, down the left-hand side, our talks with Walt, since the beginning in the inscriptions poems all the way up through and including our most recent poem, When I Peruse the Conquered Fame. Let's look into Norton's for a moment to get our background information. We're told that in this poem, the following line dropped in 1867 appeared after the present seventh line in the 1860 text of this Calamus number 26 poem. Quote, with birds singing, with fishes swimming, with trees branching and leafing, end quote. In the Barrett manuscript, Walt Whitman headed this poem with the exotic title of Razia, a word of Arabic origin meaning raid or foray. The poem took its present title in 1867. Now, again, we pointed out all of these ing words, these participles. You got about 24 of them in 9 lines, and reminding us very much of starting from Pomander, passage 14. Go back and take a look at that poem as well, and the way in which Whitman occasionally loves to play this game. Now, he rarely uses end rhyme, and yet we're going to see it in almost every line here. Let's just enjoy the poem. As I said to you guys before, I think Whitman's having a great bit of fun as he is playing the game of Leaves of Grass, and a poem like this just proves it outright. We two boys together clinging, one the other never leaving, up and down the roads going, north and south excursions making, power enjoying, elbows stretching, fingers clutching, armed and fearless, eating, drinking, sleeping, loving. No law less than ourselves, owning, sailing, soldiering, thieving, threatening, misers, menials, priests alarming, air breathing, water drinking, on the turf or the sea beach dancing, cities wrenching, ease scorning, statutes mocking, feebleness chasing, fulfilling our foray. And again, this word foray was originally the line, as we said, from the Arabic word. It's interesting to read a poem like this to very young children and notice how they immediately are attracted to a poem like this simply because of the sound quality of the poem. I think it's quite brilliant. Let's now pay attention to exactly what's going on in the poem. Now, obviously, the poem can be read as homoerotic, and it has been read that way, but certainly it can also be read as a statement of pals, and to that degree, we cannot help but think, for example, of the adventures of Tom Sawyer, and of course, Huck and Tom in that regards. Notice, first of all, we're together, and we're clinging. That is to say, we've seen this before in Leaves of Grass, that idea of holding on, grappling, wrestling, clinging, all of those terms have been here and have been a part of this. You'll remember in Song of Myself, passage 33, clinging to, remember, topples of brettle and blue. You'll remember that line, right? One, the other, never leaving is an interesting word. Now, of course, we've pointed out already in Calamus a number of times, we see that Whitman is coming to terms with departure, with the fact that people did leave him. We think, of course, of Peter Doyle and others. And here, notice, in the ideal pal relationship, and that's kind of what this poem celebrates for us, there's never a fear of departure. We're always going to be together, if you will. Then, sounding very much like what we're going to see when we study Song of the Open Road, up and down the roads going. And then we're going to start to talk about all these different goings, right? North and south, notice capitalized. Excursions making. And again, excursions, Whitman, I think in many ways wanted to understand himself as the new Homer. And of course, the Odyssey is that excursion, right? Taking that journey. And then power enjoying. The idea of power we've seen already in Leaves of Grass. Elbows stretching. He loves, as some have pointed out, Whitman is the great poet of joints. We are meaning here, of course, the joints of the body, from the wrists to the waist to the elbows, all over the body. He's always playing that game, stretching. Fingers clutching, and again, all about the body here in these participles, right? All 24 of them. Armed is the elided verb, right? And fearless. We've seen this before, that undauntingness, right? That it will, for Whitman, encapsulate what it means to be an American. And then, of course, eating, drinking, sleeping, loving. Notice the 4 in a row. We'll begin with eating and we'll end with sleeping and loving, right? No law less than ourselves, right? Notice it. I even said it, themselves, because all of a sudden it's like there's a shift in the poem and it starts to become more personal. No law less than ourselves, that is to say, sounding very much like Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. Whitman, a great lover, of course, of that precious document. Owning, sailing, we've seen this kind of thing before. These different kinds of very, what would one say, robust kinds of activity. Sailing, soldiering, but then he throws in there, and Whitman loves to do this in a list that you would kind of predict what the next word would be. All of a sudden the word thieving gets thrown in there. And then, of course, threatening gets thrown in there, and there's a list of 5 of those words. And then to describe maybe themselves as misers and menials, that is to say, not needing much, we might say. Priests alarming will take us, of course, back to Song of Myself, passage 1, creeds and schools and abeyance. Air breathing, that is to say, we're going to hear this as well with Song of Myself, out of doors. Water drinking, we've heard about this drinking only water several times, and we're going to hear more about that when we get to Song of the Open Road. On the turf or the sea beach, dancing. Now what's fascinating, if you go back and look at our study of Song of Myself, passage 11, is that you have the word dancing and, as the young men are there, and as well our voyeur who is coming to join them on the beach, dancing and laughing. Interestingly, the word laughing is the one left out of this poem. I think maybe Whitman did it on purpose. I'm going to let you imagine why he would leave that one word out. Cities wrenching, again, going back to clinging and wrenching and grappling. Ease scorning. We've seen this before in Leaves of Grass. We'll see it in Song of the Open Road. It isn't the easy life that Whitman is going to gesture for us, but the strenuous life, right? Statutes, mocking. We've seen this already before. Don't tell me what to do, foundationally American. Feebleness chasing. That is to say, there can't be any wimps in Whitman's project. Fulfilling our foray, right? That notion that there's something about the grappling spirit of America, that the 2 children, the 2 boys, the 2 nation states, the 2 parts of America, however you want to read this poem, the 2 men, the 2 lovers, however you want to read this poem, they're always about the scrap, right? The scrap, the clinging, the foray, the exploration, we might say. And again, this idea that there's got to be a certain kind of purity involved. When we hit Song of the Open Road, passage 11, he'll even say, no rum drinking, back to the water drinking. Well, what are we going to do with a poem like this? Well, I think one argument is that the idea of the artist as a pal is the artist as iconoclast. Doesn't ever want to fully fit in, and yet somehow wants to be accepted. I think it's a fascinating tension we see all the way through Leaves of Grass. Of course, to be the end rhyme here, and of the 8 of the 9 lines, it's going to end with some of these participles that are going to give us this ing sound, this ing over and over again, which makes it a fun poem, obviously, to read out loud. At 3A, well, we mentioned, of course, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, 1876. This poem published in 1860, Huck Finn in 1885, and in England, 1884. So we've got that idea of the iconoclastic children. We said this in other lectures, excuse me, about what Twain is pulling off. It's quite a remarkable tour de force for Twain, and I think there's a reason why Twain loved Whitman so much. Finally, at 3B, how do we own a poem like this? Who is your iconoclastic pal, right? And how do you read a poem like this? Do you read it as figuratively? That is to say, we have a north and a south of America that's always clinging, always wrestling, always foraying. How do you read this poem? I hope that a little poem like this is challenging you. Thank you.